Zeleny for us at the White House. Jeff, thank you. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Democratic Congressman Krishnamoorthi. Congressman, thank you for being in studio with us. Let's start here with that call made by General Milley. And I want to put up what we know about that call. This is, again, in the book Peril by Bob Woodward, Robert Costa, about the time of the election. There were two calls made to his Chinese counterpart where he said in one of those calls, General Lee, you and I have known each other for 5 years now. If we're going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time. It's not going to be a surprise. Unilateral decision to call a general of an adversarial nation and give them a heads up, essentially, if there's going to be an attack. Are you okay with that? Did he do the right thing?
I'm concerned about that. Obviously, we have to hear from General Milley about exactly the context of what was being said. What we also know, based on the published reports, is that he had intelligence that the Chinese military was anticipating an attack from the U.S. and was about to take a preemptive measure. And so if that was the case, I think that given the extraordinary circumstances surrounding Donald Trump and the concerns about his mental instability, I think it was probably appropriate for him to do something to avert war. But I'm still concerned about some specific statements he made.
Something, if not this, what? I mean, the idea that he should have done something, where he says that he's in the process here, he's in the chain of command. This was not his role, was it?
Well, as you remember, Donald Trump basically got rid of a lot of people in the chain of command and installed others who were thought to be just political hacks. And I think that it's very puzzling to me that people would criticize General Milley without really criticizing Donald Trump's underlying behavior that precipitated General Milley's actions.
But that's not really what we're hearing, Congressman, because we heard from some Republicans in Congress. We heard from Senator Rubio, who says that the president should dismiss Chairman Milley, but also Colonel Alexander Vindman, who says that he did this for the right reason, but should not have done it. Here's what he told my colleague Chris Cuomo.
I find the reporting on China to be frankly absurd. I cannot imagine a situation in which the chairman of the Joint Chiefs offers to warn an adversary of an imminent attack. So I find that, kind of casting a shadow over the rest of the reporting. And that's why I said if the reporting is accurate, if the senior most military officer in the United States Army or in the United States military acted without any oversight, without any accountability, I find that deeply troubling. It's doing the what to me seems like the wrong thing for seemingly the right reason. There's not a way to get away with that. There's not a way to walk away from that unscathed.
So he says he seemingly did it for the right reason. It was just the wrong thing to do, so wrong that he believes that maybe the reporting is wrong because it's so extreme.
It's possible. We haven't heard from General Milley. All we've heard about is the published reports in the books. That's why I think it is appropriate for him to come to Congress and explain what he said. And quite frankly, we need to also understand, what do you do in a situation like this where, the election has happened and the successor has not come into place, and you have a president who might display signs of instability?
Well, his office says that the calls were part of a series of discussions with U.S. allies and adversaries following the Capitol insurrection in order to maintain strategic stability. But as we heard from Jeff Zeleny, General Milley will be there in front of a Senate committee pretty soon. Let me move on to what's happening on Saturday, this Justice for J6 rally that's happening there. The Capitol Police, they're erecting the fencing again, other security measures. Speaker Pelosi says that this time they are much better prepared compared to January 6th. Are you confident that the Capitol Police will be able to secure the facility? We know that Congress is not in session on Saturday.
I believe so. I would like to see a few things happen. One is, I think there should be an overwhelming show of support. There should be the Metropolitan Police present. I think the D.C. National Guard should be there. Secondly, Republican leaders have to dissuade their supporters from coming to this rally. Last time on January 6th, they did just the opposite. This time, I hope they do the right thing. And then finally, I think DOJ has to hustle and increase the tempo of the prosecutions of those who committed crimes on January 6th. Hundreds have yet to be arrested, and of those who are arrested, numerous prosecutions have not unfolded. When you don't do that, you don't hold people accountable, and they think they got away with it, and you invite more of this type of behavior.
Yeah. Let's answer the broader question here. The insurrection was launched and led by people who believed the big lie, that the election was stolen. The people who will be at the Capitol this weekend also believe this lie, thinking that the people who have been or being prosecuted for what happened on the 6th are political prisoners. There's a new poll out from CNN just this afternoon that shows that 78% of Republicans believe that President Biden didn't win, and 54% say that there's solid evidence to prove it. 4 out of 5 Republicans believe that the president, that this is a stolen election. What breaks this fever?
I think, quite frankly, one of the things we're seeing is that fewer people identify themselves as Republicans. I think there are a lot more independents and, of course, Democrats. And so I think the vast majority of Democrats and independents believe just the opposite of what you just cited in that polling. And eventually, I think we're going to have to hold more Republicans accountable for their beliefs, and if they're actually in line with what you said.
What's that mean, to hold more Republicans accountable for their beliefs?
I think it means asking either elected officials or people running for office as Republicans, regardless of where they are in the country, do you believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump? And do you believe that Donald Trump had nothing to do with January 6th? Those are, by the way, some core beliefs of a lot of Republicans that we're talking to these days.
All right, Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, thank you for coming in.
Thank you so much, Victor.
All right.